Good evening. My name is Lisa Steele. I'm the artistic director of V.16, where we acknowledge that we are hosted on the lands of the Mississaugas of the Credit River, the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Wendat. Toronto is in the dish with one spoon territory, which is the treaty between the Anishinaabe, Mississaugas, and Haudenosaunee that bound them to share the territory and protect the land, and subsequent Indigenous nations, Métis and the Inuit peoples, Europeans, and all newcomers have been invited into this treaty in the spirit of peace, friendship, and respect. Welcome to the curatorial incubator V.16 Living in Hope, which we all are now, hoping for the vaccine to somehow get to Canada. Throughout the fall and early into 2021, we are hosting 8 different programs that respond to this theme. Since we're fully online, we post one title each week on Fridays. And at the conclusion of each curator's program, we post a recorded Zoom conversation, a live Zoom conversation between the curator and the artist. And tonight's conversation is the 6th to take place between our incubatees and their artists. This evening, we're presenting a conversation between the incubatee, Robin Alex McDonald, and artists Gary Kibbins, Jorge Lozano, and Rochad Nourde. Dana Claxton had a conflicting event and sends her regrets. Robin.
Thank you so much, Lisa, for the introduction. And thank you, Gary, Jorge, and Rochad for joining me today. I think Gary is the only one of the 3 of you that I've met before, so it's really quite an honor and a pleasure to meet the 2 of you virtually tonight. As I mentioned in my introduction 4 weeks ago, my program is very much about this uneasy space between hope and dejection. It's about the fragility of hope and the ways in which the project of hope requires taking on an element of risk. And, in various ways, I saw that in each of your works. So I guess first I'd like to invite the 3 of you to situate yourselves. So to say where you're joining us from geographically, emotionally these days. Jorge, you want to go first?
Yeah, okay. Basically, I think that I just want to talk about 2 things very, very quickly that,
Sure.
that have made me do what I do and be what I am. And one is being born in Colombia and growing up in a poor neighborhood. And poor neighborhoods are very rich culturally. They are very neighborhoods that are made of people from different cultures, different knowledges, Afro-Colombian, indigenous, all the mixtures. And those are neighborhoods that are always in the process of becoming. Architecturally, people build their own houses, so they are always unfinished and they're all different. So there's a lot of information in that sense. There's a lot of different kinds of cooking and smells and rhythms and music and all that stuff. Also, there are dangerous neighborhoods and you have to sort of develop some kind of cognitive domain that doesn't get you in trouble. And older boys won't rape you. Like you need to have to be very careful and move in these places. Also, there's a lot of prostitution places run by, at that time, called drag kings, transsexuals. So all this universe of unfinished narratives and an incredible diversity and creativity in some ways, I think that has influenced the way that I do. I still do narratives that are unfinished, and I work about everything, as I go in my life. And the other part that has influenced my work is being immigrants. Being immigrant is not being in different places, is being within different cultures, very much embodied. And being immigrant is a process of becoming something that you are not, and also rejecting dominant culture, the culture that discriminates you and makes you invisible in some ways. So the desire to have your own voice and and create things on your own way is being part of that emancipation, epistemological, conceptual, aesthetic emancipation. So my process of being who I am is still in the making, because it's doesn't never end. And so those two together, I think that has produced the work that I do, basically, which is very much a mode of existence. It's like almost like writing poetry in some ways.
Yeah, your work is very poetic in those ways too. Rakshad, would you maybe want to go next? Because I know in your biography you also emphasize kind of similar sentiments to what Jorge just said about this feeling at home in multiple places.
Yeah, sure. I'm born in Tehran, in Iran, and I have lived there until age 20. And so I was at, in the period that there was war and a revolution, so that it was very violent. Then with all family, we had to move little by little in Europe or go to Canada. My family are actually in Toronto, Thornhill, and now I'm in Paris because I have a studio here, and I have came here for do my fine arts section in Beaux-Arts of Paris at the age of 20. But since more than 20 years, 22 years, I am doing video arts and combining films and performance and paintings. And of course, it is touching the question of the borders or beyond the borders, and this mixture of the cultures. Actually, more I am getting age, more I understand that there is the good points everywhere and there is the negative things everywhere. So you have to match it and make all this together to make a new thinking of life. I mean, new philosophy of life that influence in your artwork.
Nice. Very well put. Thank you. And Gary?
Yeah, I don't feel I have much to impart with respect to biography in this conversation, really. I'm Canadian. I've had a fairly stable artistic and personal life, frankly, relatively speaking. So I think I'll just make some general comments about my practice, which is more about a confluence of image and language in the way that they kind of oscillate between each other. I try to enforce, in some sense, a kind of sense of instability and skepticism in the work. And I, in fact, have moved into more or less kind of, in my own mind, kind of extreme versions of this lately. And I've tried to speak more openly about, the more extreme versions of skepticism. And I think I'm speaking here about, nihilism, which I think is a positive development. I mean, it just means that people have to develop their principles based on their own histories rather than on transcendental, forces and so on. But in terms of the works themselves, they're usually committed to this idea of, a kind of a questioning process that I think is more easily attained in the world of art making than it is in other forms of human endeavor. I mean, there's just kind of a space that is, it's a privilege, in some sense, given to artists, that it's possible to be skeptical in a way that in a way that you can't in your daily life, right? And so I try and take advantage of of the specific kind of the special case sometimes that art provides general cultural processes. That is to say, we can do things there that we really can't do and ought not to do, in our daily lives.
Yeah, and I think, you know, when you started by saying that you've lived a fairly stable life and artistic career, like I do think that your works are kind of at odds with that, right? Like I do feel that your works seem very anxious in their kind of tone and in the ideas that you're exploring. You know, I know your kind of longstanding interest in nihilism, or, you know, I kind of debated when I was writing about your work whether I called it existentialism or nihilism, but there are, as you say, some very skeptical kind of tendencies there.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Well, it is.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say it's like, I just wanted to kind of reiterate the observation that one can create a space within the process of art making that's special, that's different. It's qualitatively different than daily life. And, you know, it's useful to take advantage of that. So I can explore nihilism, for example, in the process of making art and see where it goes and what it can offer us actually in a way that I don't feel I can so easily do in daily life.
Right.
Yeah.
And Jorge,
No,
what do you
I
explore
I
in your?
just wanted to add that it somehow gives you a certain freedom in the capacity to inhabit the worlds that you imagine,
Mhm.
which you cannot do sometimes in real.
Yeah, sometimes there's isolations, and actually when you are also immigrant, sometimes you feel this difference between you and the other society, the host society, that they are nice, but there's still the things that you cannot share, that those are the memories of the situations. And the art helps you to bring up, as you say, hope, and make another world. And by imagination, even if we use the image of reality, the real image, with combination with our imaginations, we can really make something between in and out, and make a dialogue between what I am living, what's in interior of me, and outside in the other societies.
Mhm.
So it is the fact of imagination. It goes through the death, sometimes through the isolation. Since there's, for the real COVID-19, I am really very, very busy, more than before, because I don't have any more time to make another thing, because it's nonstop working and imagination, imagining the another situation than what we are living with.
Mm-hmm. And so is that how you'd say you're experiencing hope at this moment, that it is something that can't exist here in the here and now, that it is necessarily, you know, as Lisa was saying, after the vaccine or elsewhere in some way?
You ask it from me?
Yeah, I'm asking you, but I'm also interested to hear from other people. But yeah, Rakshat, I was responding to you.
Yeah, I think, yeah, the vaccinations, I don't know. The question, if it is really the answer is in the vaccination. We don't know what is going on in the future, what we preserve for the future. I have learned this by the events in Middle Eastern situation. So we can never say what's going on in the future for well. But the only thing that I know is living by present, and live it truly with all your imaginations against the dark holes, if there is the dark holes. So, and that is possible. That is definitively possible with imagination.
And Jorge, are you feeling hopeful these days?
Yeah, hope to hope. I've been thinking about hope. Actually, yeah, I have a relationship with hope and nostalgia, and I've been changing my notion of nostalgia. About three days ago, I began thinking about nostalgia, what it really meant to me, and I began thinking that nostalgia is no longing for the past, and hope is no longing for a past, but is mostly bringing those archives from the past into the present and
Mhm.
seeing what we're missing in the present or what is going to disappear in the present. So the butterflies, for instance, in the tape, right, is it's not a longing from the past, but it's just the changes in the present. I made a tape a while back that I wrote Imagining Futures, and I am really tempted to go and change it. I've been thinking about it, going to imagining the present, a better present, because the future doesn't exist, right? It is only the present that we live in, and that's what we have to change. In the relation, in what do we have to change the present is somehow bringing the stuff from the past that is good and rejecting what it hasn't been good.
Gary, any thoughts on how you're experiencing, or if you're experiencing hope these days?
Well, I was kind of given to think about it, prompted by you, Robin, and it seems to me that hope is somehow also about agency. I mean, the less agency you have, the more you're inclined to need hope, right? I mean, if I have some chores to do, I don't need hope. I just do them or not, right? But it's not about hope. I have agency. But if I am contemplating, I don't know what, climate change, which is vast and global and huge in scale, my agency disappears to a vanishing point, in which case I start to think more about hope in those instances. I guess the other thing that occurred to me was that, and this is sort of uncomfortable on some level, but it also seems to me to be something about it has an almost a necessarily religious component to it. There's something about forces that you're hoping will come to bear on the circumstances. You can't really name them, therefore you're talking about hope rather than some kind of activity, some kind of specific activity, right? I mean, there's no doubt there's secular forms of hope, but it seems to be a kind of that its most interesting manifestations are in this kind of almost in this religious zone. I don't mean about religions, right. I'm just talking about, that religious in the sense that I think it was Douglas Sirk who said that, deciding not to go to church is a religious decision. Like there's always, that's always hovering near and nearby the issue of hope is this redemption, the transcendental forces that you can't name that you're hoping will come to bear. I don't know. It seemed like the if you speak of the fragility of hope, that has something to do with the fact that we're only talking about hope because our agency has been so severely reduced, right? And it and the most notable kind of public instance, at least that I can think of, was Obama's political rhetoric about hope, the audacity of hope, right? And he had a specifically religious component part to his program of hope. It was always about, we must believe in our fellow human beings. But those of us who have looked at history at all know that we can't always rely on our fellow human beings, right? So you're right, it's completely fragile. And I think you see this in like Dana's work. There was, a kind of a simple gesture with all that seemed to speak to all the complexities about hope and its fragility. You bring things together, but in the bringing together, there's always a falling apart, and the other side of hope is always, fear and despair, maybe even. So it just seemed far more complex than I ever kind of thought it was when because of your program. I was given to think about it.
Yeah, and I definitely feel, obviously there's a reason that I took this route into this kind of larger framework of hope, right? I think various other curators in the program have taken different routes, and I really did take the kind of most, not the most negative route, but I was cynical in that I do feel like hope is so fragile, and that I do feel fearful to even entertain that feeling of hope, that it can be such a kind of painful and anxious and really not always a pleasant feeling for me in particular. But yeah, and in each of your works, I did see these elements of anxiety, right? Like in Jorge's, it's really in the camera movement and the kind of whipping between, and then, in yours, Gary, you speak kind of so, your affect is so flat, but you speak fairly quickly and fairly rhythmically in ways that aren't, the way that I am used to hearing you speak. And then in Rocksheds, there's such a kind of immediacy in the beginning of focusing on balancing that line and the kind of stress that the viewer experiences. I know that your video hasn't aired yet. It'll come after this program. So hopefully viewers will see what I'm talking about then. But you really see this kind of, the foot just embodies so much anxiety, right? So I'm curious whether these elements of fearfulness or anxiety were kind of in your mind when you made these films. Roksha, do you want to maybe address that first? I saw you nodding.
Yeah, first of all, there is everything, each matter goes with its opposite matter, hope and désespoir. I don't have any more hope. But what is going on in your head, when you are disappointed, you don't have any more hope? Well, you play. How I did do this video that that you have, Red Line, RAID, because I had to make a video art for 2 minutes, and I was alone and I didn't have anybody help me. I put just a trépied, just for putting my camera on it, very down, for shooting my feet, and I had to put the what you said, the cord, lacet, on the camera, and like a dog, and turn the head of the camera to capture my feet at the meantime that I was dancing. I mean, I'm just talking about playing is a kind of hope, even if it's the outside is completely in disaster situation.
Mm-hmm.
You have to play, and playing means taking risks, probably, and without the risks, you're not happy. I mean, you become happy because it's a challenge all the time. The risks makes happy, and it's adrenaline going up and down. So when you say anxiety, yes, there's anxiety, but at the meantime, when I was doing it, that was such amazing thing, because during 3 hours between 12 a.m. until 3-4 o'clock a.m., I was trying to just shoot 2 minutes, and I played a lot, and I was laughing by myself also. Mm-hmm. But a non-conscious spirit is another thing. It is when it is inside of you, and after that you decide to make a concept, a project. But when you begin your project, the process could be very funny and agreeable and interesting, joyous, happiness.
Yeah, and there's a reason that I ended the program with your video, I think, because, in Jorge and Gary's, there's hope, and then the hope kind of diminishes over the course of the work. And yours actually has the opposite, it kind of goes from this anxious tiptoeing to a dance. But yeah, Jorge, did you feel, I think you mentioned nostalgia earlier, but that's maybe a more apt framework to think about your work. But is there any kind of attention to anxiety? Was there any desire to cultivate that?
Yeah, I just gonna start with the hope saying. I think that hope is probably one of the words that we use the most, right? All the time we're saying, I hope so, I hope, but even in conversation with yourself. And I see hope as a in some way the kind of politics that are not with policy and rules, but more with dissent. And is that hope of extracting meaning out of, especially in artistic work, extracting meaning out of hoping to make something out of something that is not in there, right? And that work, that action of doing and transforming, I think that hope that has that strength, and through hope is that things have changed in some ways and in other ways, right? And I think that through hope, aesthetically, we also produce sort of new meanings in some ways, at least for us. If we don't change anything, at least we transform ourselves.
Right.
In terms of the anxiety, yeah, it's always there. In the work, the anxiety is the camera. The anxiety is caused more that butterflies are really difficult to film. They move too quickly. It is, they just go, and you feel. It's funny because butterflies, they seem that they fly slowly, right? But trying to follow them with the camera, and they just they have very non-linear patterns of flying. So they are really hard. They just go like this. So you're always so that created an anxiety. But no, there's always an anxious moment when I look at the anxious moment of waiting to see if the film has come out first. When I look at the film, is what am I going to do with this? Because I wasn't making that tape when I was filming, right? I was unconsciously probably filming the butterflies because I grew up with butterflies, and I don't see them anymore when I go to Cali. So I went and looked for them, and I wanted to bring them in the Super 8. So I brought them in Super 8, and then when I saw that, I reflected on the possible extermination or extinction of life, right, or butterflies in this case. So that created an anxiety, and to have a dialogue with the material, it's an encounter that I wasn't planned. So there was an anxious dialogue between that and that, and in some ways what came out, but it's could have gone in another direction,
Right. Yeah, it was the butterflies that created the anxious atmosphere, not necessarily. Great. And Gary, any thoughts on that? I think your work, for me at least, is probably the most anxious, or at least it feels like it is, because of the kind of the quickness of the images.
Well, when I was scripting that, I really thought it was going to be kind of, not funny, as we say, funny, haha, but, kind of humorous, some kind of, a kind of dark, dry humor. And I was quite surprised when I finished it, and didn't seem very funny at all, and it seemed like, if anything, just downright existential. And I thought, that's not what I wanted. And I was going to go back and redo it. And I thought, yeah, it is what it's carved out its own space. It's fine. But, yeah, so it was a bit of a surprise, frankly. But it's a work that's kind of a representation of a mental space, a mental state. And I suppose it's that. In addition to the other works, they're all similar in the sense that where you can more easily see something like hope, see it through the lens of something like hope. I mean, I don't even know what hope is. It's not an emotion.
Yeah, I couldn't tell you either. I think
not an emotion. It's not an affect.
Yeah.
It's not a mental state. I don't know what it is actually, but it conforms well to a complex of kind of attitudes about the world, right? But in my work, there's the physicality of the door and the necessity of the architecture, and then the familiar physical act of opening a door and moving through it. And that was represented in those kind of solipsistic images, but there was also, of course, a collage of just of images that were other to the institutional this kind of suffocating institutional sense of that environment and that door and having a job in an institution and so on. And they're more about just references to nature, references to, I don't know what, memories perhaps, references to maybe vacations the person had experienced and wished they were still experiencing, you know. So there, I think maybe in the, in terms of the vocabulary of the images, it was that the door handles and the physicality of the door and all that stuff that got its own frame of representation and visually. But then there were these kind of fantasy, this desire for escape, that whole kind of regime of images, which seemed to be just not, it's as if the person just didn't want to be there, you know, just wanted to be somewhere else. Thank you very much. Yeah. And I think that kind of, you know, really contributed to what you're talking about, is this level of anxiety.
Mm-hmm. Well, you'll be pleased to know that one of my questions that I had pre-scripted for you was actually about the element of humor in your work. So you were successful there.
Oh, well, other people have said that, but I didn't see it. So I am very happy to hear that.
Yeah, yeah. But I want to go back because I feel like Jorge mentioned, you know, well, I shouldn't say the object, but the creature of the butterfly. Gary, you mentioned the doorway, and then in Rakshad, you have, you know, the line that the piece is named after, but you also have your own body. And I'm just curious what led the three of you to focus on these specific objects or things. And I'll just mention, even though she's not here, you know, Dana's is very much oriented around this bowl. So I did kind of find it interesting that all of your explorations were about kind of specific things, really.
Mm.
For me,
I almost want to answer for Jorge because of his Shuang Tzu reference to the butterfly, which is so great. I kind of wish I had done that, but.
I think for me, that was just the question of freedom and dance. Mm-hmm. And because at that time, still we had some problems. I mean, we were really in the traumatism that the woman could not dance anymore or be nude, naked. By their in some parts of their body, and I wanted to make just a resistance by that, and I love dancing, so I think that is a kind of art expression that we can make ourselves free. Mm-hmm. And so by feet, because the feet are the symbolic of going in advance, go on, keep going, and by dance it is just movement of happiness. Mm-hmm. So
thanks.
There is a process of kind of a metamorphosis when you do work that's very much related to the Chinese philosopher dream. That is that you sometimes you don't know if you are what you just made, or what you just made you. And I'm saying that because in the case, I think that images come from things, but images and things are not the same things, but they both conspire to create a world. And then when we enter into that world, that's when we get lost. Into being and not being, right? And in some ways, I feel that in a lot of my work, sometimes my work makes me.
Mm-hmm. It's like job, but work makes us. So this is true. Working. I have a question from Gary. Do you make documentaries? What the work that you have talked about is about documentary or video art?
Given those two categories, I'd say video art.
Video.
I've done some documentary, but it's not a primary practice for me.
Okay, but you use the images of reality, no? The real of the reality existence, not just the symbolic or by effects, or you mixed both of those?
Well, I think I do it, I think I have a tendency to do it. I think just most artists have an instinct to do, and that is to kind of weaken the reference between the image and the real, or between the language and the real, to weaken it. Because when you create distances there, it makes things, it animates thinking and thought and feeling,
Yeah.
And if the more you're more committed to insisting on the reality of the image and and the ability to language to transparently represent reality to us, the less room there is for the kind of responses that I think artists typically want from their work.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yes, but you mean the things should come naturally, not by thinking, non-consciously. Most of the time should be like that. Not
Oh,
but with unconsciously, no?
do you mean for the artist or for the viewer?
In the video arts, even for art, we have to work with unconscious and not by thinking, because when you think and you write your script totally, if it's so much pushed in the reasonable ways, you get far from the art probably, or video
Oh,
art. I mean,
I see what you're saying. I don't know. I think I would want to generalize and say that there's a combination of the two
Mhm.
things. You can't just have intuition, and you
Yeah.
can't just have reason.
Yeah.
And everybody probably deals with that in their own private way. When am I overthinking this, and when am I really not thinking about this enough? and I think everybody has their own way of navigating that
Yeah.
that
Free
tension.
by free way, with a free feeling,
Mhm.
freedom.
I think this is an incredible conversation now that could go on for a lot longer. But I don't want to lose our audience to see Rakshad's work. I want to thank each of you for your incredible contributions, not just to this conversation, which has been amazing. Thank you so much, Robin, for your curatorial direction. It's an amazing program. And really, one work moves to another. And I encourage people who haven't seen all of the works, the previous works, to start at the beginning and move to the end eventually. But tonight we are going to I'm asking everyone to stay on the VTape website. We're on Zoom Live, so we are going to switch over and we will be seeing Rakshad Nurday's Raid Line. It will play immediately after the end of our conversation, and Robin's entire program will be available for the next week until 7 p.m. Eastern Time, Friday, February 12th, when program number 7 will begin. And again, thank you all so very much. This has been an amazing conversation.
Yeah, thank you all so much.
All right.
Very enjoyable.
I think Dustin will take us off, and we will, if not, we'll sit here uncomfortably waiting to go, or I'll take us off. I think we haven't quite got this live thing down exactly right. And Rakshad, I think 2 of your friends came into the waiting room.